Rain hammered the pavement like a million tiny hammers, echoing through the bustling chaos of Mumbai. Grey clouds pressed low over the skyline, and traffic horns wailed like sirens from another world. Amid this urban orchestra of urgency and noise, Aira Kapoor stood motionless at a crowded intersection in Bandra, umbrella in hand, heart in pieces. She wasn't crying. Not anymore. That had ended weeks ago when her tear ducts dried out after Vithian, her fiancé of 2 years, simply disappeared. No explanation. No message. Just gone. She blinked back a sigh, stepping into a bookstore, half to escape the rain, half to escape the war in her chest. Her soaked dupatta clung to her arm, the scent of wet pages and old wood pulling her somewhere strangely safe. Her phone buzzed for the 7th time that morning. Mum. Again. Pick up. You can't stay unmarried forever. Better. Maybe you should call Vithian. Men sometimes just need space. Aira clenched the device until her knuckles turned pale. Then, in a rare flicker of rebellion, she turned it off, and that's when she saw it. A plain brown leather-bound journal sitting in a vintage bin near the poetry shelf. No price tag. Just one gold-lettered title, slightly faded. Your Mind is a Magnet. She picked it up, running her fingers over the soft leather. It felt worn, like it had a story of its own. Flipping it open, she found handwritten entries by someone she didn't know, but somehow already understood. I used to chase people who didn't even look back. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought silence meant peace. But my mind was tuned to pain, until I changed the frequency. Aira sat down on the nearest wooden bench, and for the first time in weeks, the world outside faded. Back in her apartment that night, a too quiet place with spotless floors and untouched candles, Aira poured herself tea and reread the journal's first few entries. She remembered when love felt like fireworks, the first time Vithian held her hand, the way he made her laugh so hard in coffee shops that strangers stared. But somewhere the laughs faded. His words became sharp, then colder, then rare. Love turned into walking on eggshells, silencing herself to keep the peace, justifying red flags, because she was afraid of being alone. The worst part wasn't the heartbreak. It was the silence afterward. The way he left, like she never mattered. She held the journal close to her chest, eyes stinging. You don't attract love when you're desperate for it. You attract what you believe you deserve. Heal first, then watch the world come to you. The next day, her boss at the design studio called her into a glass meeting room. You've been missing deadlines, Aira. Your work lacks energy. Is everything okay? She nodded, lied, smiled like people do when their insides are crumbling. That night, she sat on the floor of her room, surrounded by sticky notes and doodles of half-done projects, feeling like she was failing at everything. The voice in her head whispered, "You're too emotional. You're not strong enough. No one stays with a broken girl." But then her eyes fell on one journal entry again, as if it was waiting to be read tonight. Don't beg for love. Don't shrink to fit. The day you finally choose yourself, everything will begin to shift. The next morning, she did something unthinkable. She blocked Vithian's number. Her thumb hovered for a second, trembling, but when she did it, a weird lightness bloomed in her chest. She picked a bright mustard kurta from her wardrobe, one she hadn't worn in months because he used to say it was too loud. She wore it anyway. At the studio, she greeted people with warmth, made a killer mood board, sketched with energy. Her boss raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Aira simply smiled. That evening, she returned to the same bookstore, journal in her tote bag, eyes scanning the shelves. A cozy, earthy smell wafted from the back. Brewed coffee. She followed it. That's where she saw him. Omar. Simple linen shirt. Tattooed wrist. deep thoughtful eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He wasn't stunning in the movie star way, he was stunning in the real way. As if he'd lived stories he didn't talk about. As if silence was his second language. He owned the cafe inside the bookstore, she later found out. He noticed her journal when she placed it on the counter while ordering chai. "That's a good one," he said, nodding toward it. "You've read it?" she asked. "No, but I wrote something like that once when I was learning to breathe again." Era looked at him for a long second. There was something familiar in his voice. Something unguarded. She didn't ask more, but when she left, she turned around to glance at him, only to find he was already watching her go. 2 weeks had passed since Era picked up the journal, and something inside her was softer, not healed, not whole, but growing. Each morning, she sat by her balcony, barefoot, scribbling in that leather-bound book. The pages were half-filled now, but instead of someone else's handwriting, they were hers. "I release the need to chase. I deserve to be chosen freely. I will stop apologizing for taking up space." Her mornings now began without Vithian's ghost in her head, and her evenings ended with candlelight and jazz in the background, tiny rituals that felt like planting roots in her own soul. She hadn't spoken to Omar again, not yet, but something about him lingered. It happened on a Thursday. The rain had returned. Era sat alone near the cafe window, journal open, lost in her thoughts when Omar approached, holding 2 steaming mugs. "You look like someone who needs strong coffee and a soft word." His voice was low, playful, steady. She smiled, not expecting the warmth that rose in her cheeks. They talked about books, art, how she used to draw cities just to escape from the one she lived in. He confessed he once wanted to be a musician, but after losing someone close, he never played again. There was no flirting, no pressure, just understanding, that rare sacred kind that feels like home. When she finally left, he walked her to the door without a word, but in his eyes, something silent passed, an offering, an invitation. The next day, her phone buzzed again. "Vithian." Era stared at the screen. Her fingers shook. Blocked numbers can still find their way through. Sometimes. "Can we talk? I made a mistake. You know no one else gets me like you do." The old ache stirred. That lonely girl inside her wanted to run to him, to go back to the familiar chaos, to stop feeling alone. She typed a reply, deleted it, typed again. Then she opened her journal and wrote instead, "Just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's love." She didn't text back, and the silence felt like victory. Omar invited her to a community art class he hosted on Sundays. "It's nothing serious, just people healing on canvas." Era hesitated, but curiosity won. She showed up in a white kurta with her hair tied loosely, carrying colors she hadn't used in years. He handed her a blank canvas and whispered, "Don't paint something perfect, just paint what your heart hasn't said yet." So she did. She painted a cracked heart with roots growing through it. A skyline bathed in rain, a girl alone on a balcony, writing to herself. When she looked up, Omar was watching, not her art, her. They didn't speak much after class, but when he walked her out, he gently took her hand, held it for just a second too long. Era's chest fluttered, not like the chaos she knew with Vithian, but a calm, slow burn. Omar showed up at her studio one afternoon, with coffee and a tiffin box. "You forget to eat when you're creating," he said matter-of-factly. No man had ever brought her lunch without a string attached. No man had ever noticed when she was too deep in her own world to care for her body. They sat on the rooftop together, sharing silence and sabzi. "You're not like most people," she told him. He smiled faintly. "Neither are you. That's why you attract confusion, because clarity terrifies those who live in fog." She wasn't sure if that was a compliment, but it made her want to write a poem. That night, she wrote Vithian, a letter she never planned to send. You taught me what love shouldn't feel like. For that I thank you. But I will no longer let your silence define my worth. I don't hate you, I just finally choose me. She folded it, burned it, and as the smoke curled into the air, Era felt her chest lighten, not healed, not whole, but becoming. Sunday mornings had started to feel different, no longer hollow or lonely. Era would open her window to let the breeze in, play old gazelles in the background, and sip her coffee while waiting, not for a message but for the bell. And like clockwork, Omar would show up with something small, a flower, a book, a story. This time, it was a sketch he made of her painting from art class, but he had added something tiny: red blossoms on the tree she had painted bare. Why flowers? She asked. He looked at her, eyes steady. Because you survived winter. That line stayed with her all day. The monsoon returned, not gently this time. Era was stranded outside her studio, hugging a soaked folder of her latest sketches when Omar pulled up beside her in his car. Get in. You're going to catch a fever. She hesitated. But his voice wasn't commanding. It was warm. It made her feel safe. In the car their silence was comfortable. She was dripping wet, her curtain clinging to her frame, cheeks flushed. Omar pulled off his jacket and gently draped it over her. You're shivering, he said. And then, without thinking, he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Their eyes locked, and for the first time, Era didn't pull away. That night, he stayed for dinner. They ate by candlelight, not out of romance, but because the power was out. They talked about heartbreak, loss, fear. Era told him things she'd never told anyone, how Vithian once made her cry at her own birthday party, how she stopped painting for a year, how she never felt enough, not as a woman, not as an artist. Omar didn't interrupt, didn't offer clichés. He just sat there, holding space for her wounds. When he reached for her hand across the table, it didn't feel like possession, it felt like peace. They almost kissed, almost, but Era pulled back. I'm not ready, she whispered, and Omar smiled softly. I'll wait. I'm not here to complete your healing, I'm just here to witness it. A week later, Era received an invitation. A private art gallery wanted to feature her work, a showcase, a solo exhibition. It felt unreal. She rushed to her journal. I'm being seen, not just looked at, but truly seen. She called Omar. I want you to be there. You're part of this. His reply. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. 5. Era's night of becoming. The night of the exhibition, Era wore a simple maroon sari, her hair loose, her eyes glowing with something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. The gallery buzzed with applause, admiration, praise. But all she could focus on was Omar, standing in the corner, looking at her like she was magic. When she stood beside her final piece, a mirror framed with words from her journal, she caught her own reflection, and for the first time, she didn't see a girl trying to be enough. She saw a woman who was enough. Omar came beside her. Do you see her now? He asked. She nodded, eyes glistening. I do. And this time, when he leaned in, she let him kiss her, not because she needed it, but because she wanted it. Just days after the exhibition, Vithian called again. I saw the photos. You look different. Can we just meet once? No drama, just closure. Era's fingers hovered over the decline button, but then she thought, what if this was the final step? She met him at a crowded cafe, dressed in all white, like peace personified. Vithian smiled, that old familiar smile, but it didn't move her. He talked, apologized, tried to stir memories, and she just listened. Then gently but firmly, she said, I forgive you, but I don't belong to that version of me anymore. She walked out without looking back. Outside, Omar waited in his car. She slid into the seat beside him. He didn't ask what happened, he just took her hand. And this time, her silence wasn't empty, it was full. Era's mornings had changed, not because of a resolution, not because of motivation, but because of alignment. She woke up now with purpose, stretching in silence, journaling not her goals, but her feelings, painting not to impress, but to express. Her life no longer revolved around seeking, it revolved around being. The voice that used to say, "You're not enough," was quieter now, replaced with one that said, "You are love, not loved, not lovable, but love itself." The mirror didn't lie anymore, it smiled back. Things around her changed, subtly. The art community began recognizing her. Commissions came in, a popular magazine interviewed her, she was invited to mentor young artists, something she'd always dreamed of. Even her parents, once skeptical of her choices, started celebrating her wins with proud, teary eyes. "It's like everything's finally flowing," she said to Omar one evening. He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you stopped pushing," he whispered. "You started allowing." And that was it. She wasn't chasing anything anymore, she was just open, and everything she'd once begged for began finding her. One night, during a small artist circle, a young girl approached Era with trembling hands holding a sketch. "I didn't think people like me could do this, until I saw you speak," the girl whispered. Era looked down at the raw drawing, shaky lines, unfinished shading, but something about it sparkled. She squeezed the girl's hand and said, "The world doesn't need perfect, it needs real." That night, Era cried, not from pain, but from arrival. She had become the person she once needed. Things with Omar weren't dramatic. No grand declarations, no public displays. They were gentle, rooted. He brought her chai, while she painted. She packed him sketchbooks for his shoots. They laughed about things no one else found funny. They sat in silence without needing to fill it. It wasn't the kind of love she once craved. The chase, the chaos. It was better, because it didn't feel like falling, it felt like floating. One night, while organizing her wardrobe, she found the old necklace vase. She held it for a moment. It no longer hurt. It no longer meant anything. She smiled and placed it in a donation box, then walked over to her easel, and started a new painting. This one had a woman standing in the middle of a storm, arms wide open, rain pouring, but her face lit with peace. Era called it the magnet within, and in that moment, she realized, her life didn't transform because of one person, or one moment. It transformed because she did. That night, she wrote a letter she'd never send. "Dear younger me, you won't believe this, but one day you'll smile without faking it. You'll create without overthinking. You'll love without losing yourself. You'll wake up and feel peace in your bones. And the world, it'll move with you, not against you, because you stopped chasing and started choosing. I'm so proud of you. Love, Era." Omar watched her from across the cafe. As she spoke to a group of students, her hands moved with passion, her eyes sparkled with meaning. When she returned to their table, he just said, "You're magic, you know that." She smiled, her hand over his. Not magic, just finally aligned. And with that, Era realized, she hadn't attracted this life because she wanted it desperately. She had attracted it because she believed she deserved it. Era stood at the gallery door, her heart racing, not because of the crowd or the art, but because of something else. For the first time, she truly believed in her worth. Her latest exhibition was a hit. Each piece was a reflection of her journey, of the woman she'd become. Omar stood at the back, watching her, pride radiating from his eyes. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. As she mingled with guests, taking in their admiration, Era realized that success wasn't about competition or proving herself. It was about sharing her truth with the world and letting it unfold on its own terms. "Your work is inspiring," someone said to her, eyes wide. Era smiled softly, bowing her head. It's just me, finally allowing myself to be. Days turned into weeks, and Era felt a quiet peace in her heart. The past was behind her, no longer dragging her down. She had found a love that didn't require perfection or sacrifice. She and Omar spent their days in a way that felt right. Morning walks, quiet dinners, sharing stories and dreams. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just a sense of contentment that wrapped around them like a warm blanket. And when they kissed, it felt like the world was exactly as it should be. Era had always thought of herself as a painter, but now, she saw herself as something more, a creator of life, not just art. Every decision she made, every move she took, was a brushstroke on the canvas of her existence. She no longer worked to be seen, or validated. She created because it was in her to do so. Her studio became a place of calm, a space where she could experiment, grow and express. Her art wasn't about impressing people anymore. It was about feeling the joy of creation, and sharing that with the world. Her name became known in the art community, but that was never the goal. The goal was to inspire others to find their own alignment, to show them that the beauty of life lay not in striving, but in being. One afternoon, after a successful exhibition in New York, Era sat on a rooftop terrace, with Omar, looking out at the city below. Look at this, Omar said, his hand gently brushing against hers. You did this. Era looked at him, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. She smiled softly, but the smile wasn't about pride, it was about peace. No, we did this. I'm just finally living the life I've always attracted. And she realized that the life she had created, this peace, this love, this success, wasn't something she had forced or chased. It was the result of aligning with her true self, of trusting that everything she needed was already within her reach. She hadn't just attracted success, she had attracted the right kind of life, one filled with purpose, passion and love. As the night drew on, Era and Omar stayed by the window, watching the city that never slept. But for Era, this wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of something even greater. She was no longer seeking, she was creating, she was living. And as she looked at Omar, she knew that her life had only just begun, not because of him, but because of her. We're just getting started, she whispered to him, and Omar kissed her forehead, his words soft but sure. I can't wait to see what comes next. As Era sat in the studio the next day, painting a new canvas, her thoughts were clear. She didn't need to chase anything anymore. Love, success, peace. It had all come to her, not because she forced it, but because she had aligned with her true self. And she knew that the universe had a way of giving us exactly what we needed when we were ready to receive it.